Story 1. I had COVID and slept for 20 hours a day for 5 days. When I woke up, I took my dog outside twice, once in the morning and once in the evening. She slept next to me the entire time and never left my side. It was really sweet. Story 2. There was a 3-day stretch when I had the flu and slept for 61 hours in a 72-hour period. I have never felt worse in my life. My parents said they would come in and check every now and then to make sure I was breathing. Story 3. When I was a teenager, I caught mononucleosis. Over the course of 6 weeks, I averaged around 20 hours of sleep per day, more or less. My experience was actually quite nice. There were no painful symptoms outside of a fever for the first couple of days, only some lymph node swelling and fatigue. The main bonus was that it occurred during the school year, making it feel like an extra long vacation. My teachers were all very accommodating since they knew I was ill. Story 4. I slept for 3 days straight without getting up. It followed a year-long manic episode during which I was awake for 13 days straight. Story 5. About 17 hours later, I was at university. After the last exam, which I was confident I would pass, relief washed over me. I returned to the hostel and just passed out. Story 6. About 17 to 18 hours. Our exams were over. My roommate and I had an early dinner at a nice restaurant. The food was delicious. I fell asleep around 9 p.m. and woke up the next day around 3 or 4 a.m. Those were amazing college days. Story 7. I had just pulled an all-nighter and took the Adderall that my doctor prescribed. After 48 hours of delusion, I managed to lie in bed. Within seconds, I was out. I fell asleep at 9 p.m. on a Friday and woke up at 3 p.m. on Sunday. I felt incredibly refreshed. Never again. I find it hard to stay awake nowadays if I'm even an hour late to bed. I'm 28. Story 8. I attended a selection course in the military at the age of 25. We went through our version of Hell Week, which lasted 10 days. During the last 5 to 6 days, we operated on little to no sleep. We had missions at night and spent the days refitting and preparing for the next mission. We were all hallucinating, wandering off into the woods and speaking nonsensically. Once I returned, I ate at In-N-Out and then slept for 24 hours straight. Story 9. When I was a teenager, one Saturday my mom came to my room and woke me up. "Yolanda, you have been asleep for 14 hours. What is wrong?" "Mom, it's the weekend. I don't have anything to do, and there's no school." Story 10. It must have been a couple of years. I had this dream the entire time. I had a wonderful and loving family with a beautiful wife and children. Everything was perfect. We had a lovely home in a great neighborhood. However, one day I noticed my desk lamp started to look a little unusual. Story 11. I was infatuated with a guy as a young teen, and I frequently saw him in my dreams. I pretended to be really sick and slept for 48 hours. Story 12. I worked 11 hours straight, totaling 27 hours as a taxi driver during a blizzard. None of the day drivers showed up, and I wanted the extra money. I made almost $1,000, and it was worth it. Story 13. I was in and out of surgeries a lot for a week. They basically only woke me up to check if I was still conscious. Story 14. I had been sick and barely slept the last 2 nights, so I got off work on Friday night, ate a bunch of chicken nuggets, and took a double dose of NyQuil. I then proceeded to pass out until sometime Sunday morning, feeling amazing. Story 15. I have never slept for longer than 20 hours at a time. I have definitely slept for 20 hours, woken up for a minute, then gone back to sleep for another 10 hours. When I had influenza H1N1, I did that for 2 days, never staying awake for longer than 20 minutes. Story 16. I have a feeling people will provide ridiculous and fake answers just to try to outshine someone else. Story 17. 3 days have passed since I came off a meth binge. It was not a proud moment, but that was when I decided to quit. Luckily, I only dabbled and wasn't fully addicted. My roommate mentioned that I would get up to use the bathroom, but I don't recall that. Story 18. I once slept for 20 hours after experiencing intense, long-term insomnia. While the cause of my insomnia was not pleasant, The 20 hours of sleep was heavenly. After about 12 hours, I reached a state where I would wake up briefly, but my entire body felt fuzzy and warm, and my mind was perfectly calm. Then I would drift back to sleep, repeating this cycle every hour or so. It's what I imagine heroin might feel like. Story 19. I had 12 hours of deep sleep after climbing Mount Rainier from the parking lot to the summit and back home in 36 hours without sleeping. It was the best sleep of my life. Story 20. Up to 11 hours is how long I typically sleep after missing a night of sleep, though this doesn't happen often. Story 21. I became very ill and was unable to do anything for almost 3 days. I believe it was the flu. I lost track of whether it was day or night. Story 22. I probably sleep for about 12 or 13 hours continuously. If it's not continuous, just yesterday I woke up around 11:30 after sleeping for about 6 hours, spent a couple of hours awake, then went back to sleep and didn't wake up again until around 8:30 p.m. My work keeps me on unpredictable schedules, so I essentially do not have a regular sleep routine. I sleep whenever I have time and feel tired. Story 23. I strained a muscle in my shoulder, and the doctor prescribed me Panadine Forte and Valium. I lost just over a day and woke up to my friend banging on the door because he couldn't reach me. I later learned that anything with codeine makes me sleepy, so the added Valium knocked me out completely. Story 24. Straight? Maybe 16 hours. But there was one time when I was really sick and couldn't stay awake for more than an hour at a time, so I was basically asleep for 3 days. Story 25. My family and I stayed awake for 3 consecutive nights when we ran away from home. We managed to stay alert the first 2 nights, while the third night was fueled by pure adrenaline. After that, we were completely exhausted. Story 26. I think mine was probably 13 hours. Also, I believe I might have been the only one who has never pulled an all-nighter in my entire life. I just cannot do it. Is anyone else in the same situation? Story 27. Just under 24 hours, I had a serious meth addiction. I would be awake for 3 days straight and then crash for a bit. After a particularly bad binge, I was out for almost 24 hours. A few months later, I turned my life around. I am now 18 years clean. Story 28. 15 hours into my first year of university, I realized it was the first time in my life living alone and sleeping in a place that faced away from the sunrise. There was no stimulus to wake me up. Story 29. I was in active psychosis and was awake for 3 days, feeling very unwell. Eventually, I was committed and sedated. Then I slept for 2 whole days with little to no disturbance. Mental health can be incredibly challenging. Story 30. When I was younger, around 10 or 11 years old, I felt sick. My vision was strange, and everything had a red tint. I went to bed around 5 p.m. and woke up at 6 p.m., feeling a little off. Apparently, I woke up at 6 p.m. the next day. Story 31. Excluding one trip to the restroom, I stayed awake for 39 straight hours. I got up Monday morning, stayed awake for 3 consecutive nights, with some brief micro-sleeps, I'm sure, and went to bed Thursday night. I awoke again Saturday around noon. Story 32. About 20 hours. I was very tired from classes. I was confused about how the common room got so messy in the 2 hours it felt like. Story 33. I once slept for 2 days because I was coming off a drug binge and I am 90% sure I had COVID. My phone was blown up like crazy. Story 34. I was one of those kids who always had perfect attendance in school. I never got particularly sick, and if I did, I would tough it out. So when break started, all that defense could take a breather. During winter break in 6th grade, I succumbed to a deep infection and collapsed into a severe fever, being bedridden for the better part of a month. I remember flashes of eating soup, going to the bathroom, and a couple of waking dreams, but other than that, I slept through Christmas and New Year's and didn't get back on my feet until it was almost time to return to school. My memory of the entire time was hazy, and I lost a significant amount of weight for a 6th grader. When I was occasionally awake, I hallucinated shapes and felt the air between my fingers, which was terrifying, so I would just go back to sleep and endure long, unsettling dreams. When we all returned to school, it felt like I had been gone for a year. Nobody seemed familiar, and it took me a while to reconnect with them. We had the activity of sharing what we did over winter break, and honestly, I couldn't think of anything to write or say. I just blanked during that entire time. Story 35. In February 2021, I had COVID for the first time with one of the initial variants. I slept for 22 hours, and my brother had to come check on me because he thought I was unresponsive. It took me 10 days just to be able to walk up a flight of stairs. Story 36. A day. I think it was like 22 hours of sleep and 2 hours of getting up to use the restroom or eat. I had a really bad cold. Story 37. I could have slept forever when I was a teenager. In my 20s, my child made me get up. In my 40s, I had to get up and go to work and longed for sleep. Now that I am 70, I wish I could sleep past 8 a.m. I go to bed around 2 a.m. and wake up at 7 a.m. Story 38. I believe it was about 16 to 18 hours. I returned to the United Kingdom after a trip to Florida. To avoid jet lag caused by the departure time from Florida, I was awake the entire day in Florida and during the flight, landing at the beginning of the day in the UK. This meant I was up for about 2 days straight, with one of those days spent rushing around Disney and the airport, which was already quite tiring. Apparently, I could not handle sleep deprivation at 10 years old, as I began hallucinating for about half an hour before finally falling asleep. Story 39. 16 hours twice. Once several years ago when I tried Xanax for the first time. It's not legal here, and my friend ordered 1 gram of Xanax powder. He wrapped some up in a rolling paper and gave it to me. I'm not sure how much it was, but I guess it was more than 5 milligrams, around 10 to 15 milligrams. Not only did I sleep for 16 hours, but I also don't remember that night after taking it or the next 2 days. The second time was just a week or two ago. Since my ex left me, my insomnia has been worse than ever. I stayed awake for over 40 hours and then slept for 16 hours. It was heavily interrupted, waking up multiple times for short periods, no more than 5 minutes each time. I'd say it's a mix of depression and being awake for more than 40 hours. When I did wake up, I didn't want to be awake. I find it ironic that I can't sleep, but I also don't want to be awake, not in a humorous way. Story 40. I woke up for a few minutes here or there to use the restroom, but immediately went back to sleep. Many times I was on medication for chronic pain and depression. Now I can hardly sleep for more than 2 to 3 hours due to pain, even though I only take kratom and sleep medications from the store. I'm not sure which is worse. Story 41. 24 hours was really confusing. I lay down at 5 p.m. and got up, and it was still 5 p.m. until I realized what had happened. Story 42. About 18 to 19 hours. I went on a trip and didn't sleep for 2 days straight. I got home around lunchtime and didn't wake up until 7 or 8 the next day. I was focused on tracking calories and weighing myself, and I remember waking up to find I had lost about 6 pounds. Story 43. I once worked for 13 hours dismantling a Ferris wheel. After being awake all day, I fell asleep at 2 p.m. and woke up at 9 a.m. 2 days later, totaling 42 hours. Story 44. One day, for no apparent reason, I slept for an entire 24 hours. I had a date scheduled for that day. When I woke up, I didn't realize I had missed it and reached out to my date, hoping to reconnect. She assumed I had ghosted her, which created a seed of distrust that ended the relationship early on. I found it incredibly hard to believe that I had slept for an entire day. This remains one of the more peculiar occurrences in my life, and I never understood why it happened. Story 45. Let's say I sleep 7 hours a day, and sometimes 9 hours. Be honest with yourself. If I am 30 years old, 7 hours multiplied by 365 days multiplied by 30 years equals more than 76,000 hours of sleep. This amounts to almost 9 years of continuous sleep. Story 46. 15 hours. We conducted an experiment in my psychology class to track how much we slept over a week and then sleep in on the weekend without any interruptions. My sleep schedule is terrible. Story 47. I had to prepare for the second of 3 thesis defenses. We needed to secure our working prototype and also helped our friends with theirs. I was awake for 36 hours. I went home, slept at 6 p.m., and woke up at 6 a.m. I can't handle any instance longer than that. Story 48. The entire day, I fell asleep around 10 p.m. on Friday and woke up at 2 a.m. on Sunday. My abdomen was in a lot of pain because I hadn't used the toilet once in 28 hours. Story 49, 36 hours or so, then woke up for about an hour and went back to bed for 24 more. I was sick and had a severe vitamin B12 deficiency. Story 50. I once slept for over 24 hours. I fell asleep right after my girlfriend went to work, and when I woke up, she asked where I had been the night before since I hadn't answered the door. I thought I was waking up after she got home from work, but it was actually a full day later. I was so confused. We were heavily into stimulants back then, and I'm glad that's in the past. Story 51. I missed an entire day after one finals week in college. All of my exams were on Friday that semester, so I stayed up all night for 4 consecutive nights to study. I returned to my parents' house on Friday night and woke up Sunday afternoon. Story 52. I spent 34 hours with a bathroom break. I went to bed on a Friday at midnight and officially got up on Sunday at 10 a.m. This has happened to me twice, possibly due to a virus or illness. However, it only occurred those 2 times about 10 years ago, and I experienced no other symptoms, neither before nor since. Story 53. I was awake for about 20 hours and had a few drinks. I passed out and woke up the next night when my friend climbed up to my bedroom window to wake me. Story 54. I once did close to 18 hours. I don't remember why. I must have stayed up for 2 days or something, probably because of work. Adeslika Mayob. Story 55. I don't remember the exact details, but I had glandular fever when I was 18, about 20 years ago. A whole week felt like a fever dream spent on the couch at my mom's place. I might have woken up for about 10 minutes a day to try and eat a small bowl of soup, and I can only recall going to the bathroom once or twice. It must have been around 22 to 23 hours a day for 4 or 5 days. That really took a toll on me. Story 56. I slept for 13 hours after a school trip. We traveled to this country by boat and kept sneaking out of our rooms to attend the parties held on the boat. Story 57. I was being abused by my father. I stayed awake for weeks to avoid him at night, only sleeping in small increments at school. When he was jailed, I slept for days. I'm not sure how many. I only got up to use the restroom. My mother would bring me water and food. The food went untouched, and she had to help me drink the water. Story 58. I had a 4-hour surgery and felt fine afterward. I relaxed for a bit and took a decent nap. The next day, I took an evening nap and woke up in the afternoon. I believe I only took one more nap during my recovery, which was a more modest 3-hour rest. I healed quickly and walked at least a mile every day after the first few days. Story 59. I stayed awake for 49 hours. I don't remember why, but I do remember sleeping for 20 hours straight afterward. It was the best sleep I ever had. Story 60. About 18 hours ago, I was in a drug-induced stupor, experiencing dream after dream until I woke up on my roommate's bed. He was using Adderall while day trading. It was a strange time. Depression had me sleeping a lot, but I never really checked how long I was asleep because I was depressed. However, I'm sober now and not really depressed anymore. Story 61. I spent 20 hours at a time for about 2 weeks feeling depressed and withdrawn. My brain has never been the same since. I get migraines if I sleep too much now. Story 62. For about a year, I used methamphetamine and would stay awake for 6 days, then sleep on the 7th day for 15 to 20 hours straight, and then repeat. I did this approximately 42 times that year. If the sun was rising or setting when I woke up, I often wouldn't know if it was morning or evening. Story 63. 13 hours during my first week of college was so refreshing. I usually slept between 6 to 8 hours before then, depending on when my mother decided to vacuum. Story 64. When I had COVID-19, I thought I had it for 3 days and felt fine. It turns out I had it for just over a week. during which I was sleeping for up to 20 hours at a time. I would randomly wake up sweating, use the bathroom, and then go back to sleep. Story 65. About 24 hours in the hospital due to severe dehydration and critically low potassium levels. Received intravenous fluids and felt extremely weak, barely able to move. Story 66. I spent 36 hours not realizing that taking a Xanax after drinking was a very bad idea. It scared me and taught me a valuable lesson. Story 67. 17 hours had passed, and I probably would have gone longer if I didn't need to get up to use the bathroom a few times. I was extremely hungover from partying for about 4 days straight in college. It was dreadful. When I finally got up, I had a large sub, a large pizza, and probably 2 gallons of water. Story 68. Nearly 33 hours straight through. During medical residency, I had a brutal week of multiple days with less than 1 hour of sleep. When I finished my last shift on Friday night, I went home and went to bed at 8 p.m. I woke up Sunday morning to my alarm at 4:45 a.m. for my next shift. It wasn't my first time sleeping more than 24 hours, so I was good at fluid restricting beforehand to avoid waking up to use the restroom. I was also skilled at holding my bladder for quite a while. This combination allowed for solid sleep. The longest shift I ever worked was also during residency. It lasted 84 hours straight due to being called in while on backup and not officially working, according to my work hours log, to avoid issues with reporting a work hours violation. I worked my regular shift on Friday and was on call Friday into Saturday, but I was called in and worked the entire 24-hour backup shift on Saturday, straight into my 24-hour on-call shift on Sunday, and then into my regular workday on Monday. Fortunately, I lived close to the hospital, but I went home that afternoon and fell asleep at a red light, waking up only after someone honked at me. I passed out on the couch and was an hour late for work again the next morning. No amount of money in the world could convince me to do residency again. Story 69. 15 hours. I was young and traveling with my family to meet relatives for Christmas. We were flying internationally, and I cannot sleep in a vehicle. We left home at 5 in the morning and did not arrive until 2 in the morning the next day. Story 70. A whole day? After a 3-day drug binge, I woke up shocked to see it was Saturday. I'm glad I'm sober now. What an awful feeling. Story 71. Once when I was a child, I experienced severe insomnia, so my mother gave me one of her sleeping pills. I slept for 2 days straight, no joke. My father was angry, and my mother said, "Hey, I take 3 every night." So I figured one would be fine. Story 72. I was very run down from partying and feeling sick. It was my second year of college, and I needed that sleep badly. Story 73. I sleep for 12 hours a couple of times a year. If I have nothing to do on a Saturday and the weather is bad, I go to bed at 11 and wake up at 11 the next day. Story 74. I had the flu for 14 hours. The fatigue really affected me, and I felt terrible that day, so I just wanted to sleep. Story 75. Sick. 2 days with bathroom breaks. Normal. I struggle with math, but I went to bed at 1 a.m. and woke up at 3 p.m. Story 76. 37 hours after a 4-day binge on meth. I have been clean for a few years now, thankfully. I would not recommend using drugs. Story 77. I slept for 90 hours straight without waking up. I was amazed that my body could hold out that long. I would have slept longer, but someone knocked on my door for about 30 minutes until I answered. Story 78. My record was 18 hours, waking twice, turning around, and continuing to sleep. It was a grueling 2 weeks, and I just collapsed on Friday evening. It was a long time ago, but I still remember getting up at 5 p.m. Story 79. 76 hours in an induced coma due to a severe head injury from playing hockey. Fortunately, I have almost no long-term effects. Story 80. When I was around 15, I pretended to be sick so I could sleep for 3 days straight. I got up once each day to get a drink of water and use the restroom, and briefly when my dad brought me my Christmas gift, an AC/DC CD. I just looked at him, said thanks, and fell back asleep, so he only stayed for a few minutes. I was living in an extremely abusive situation with my mom and stepdad, and I think my body and mind shut down from all the anxiety, depression, and stress. Story 81. I slept about 22 of the 24 hours after I suffered a major concussion. I only got up sporadically to use the bathroom and when my family checked on me to make sure I was okay. Story 82. I was in the hospital for 4 days due to food poisoning. I slept for 3 days straight. The only time I got up was for the nurse's visit to change the intravenous line. On the 4th day, it felt like I was never sick. Story 83. 19 hours without waking felt like being in a coma. I felt depressed and tired mentally, physically, and emotionally. Story 84. I went on a 3-week road trip with my daughter this past August. I left her in New Mexico with her boyfriend and went solo to the Grand Canyon, as I had never been there before. I rented an Airbnb for a few days and explored the area. The night before I left, I felt terrible and suspected I had COVID for the first time. I checked the current guidelines, which required masking and flying. Regrettably, I had to comply. I had a 2-hour drive from my Airbnb to Flagstaff and caught my flight in Arizona. I had a connection in Texas, but I do not remember being at that airport or getting to the correct gate. After landing in Ohio, my husband picked me up and administered a COVID test, which came back positive. I went home, took a shower, and then slept for 19 hours. However, when I woke up, I felt okay again. Story 85. There was a time during the autumn and winter of COVID when I was living alone in a quiet place and working nights. I went to bed at 6 a.m. each day and slept until 4 or 5 p.m. It was wonderful, and I am sad that I will probably never sleep so well again. Story 86. I had bronchitis a few months ago and took Thursday and Friday off work. I slept almost the entire weekend and think I lost around 10 pounds of muscle mass. Story 87. Consecutively, with no medications involved, I can sleep for about 30 hours. Depression is a powerful force. Now that I have pets, I wake up long enough to feed them and let them out, but I can spend 22 to 23 hours a day asleep for days or weeks at a time. I have to rely on outside sources to help care for them during those instances. I hope my new medications help. Story 88. 20 hours. From 9 p.m. to 5 p.m. the next day. The doctor prescribed me some antidepressant sleeping pills. I only took 1 pill. Story 89. I was in a car accident that caused me to slam into a guardrail and total my car. The doctor prescribed muscle relaxers, which I took to help with the pain in the days that followed. After taking them, I often felt very drowsy. Story 90. As a child with scarlet fever, it felt like strep throat on steroids, accompanied by a full-body rash. I didn't think it existed anymore, but I contracted it when I was 7 or 8 years old, and I was born in 1990. Story 91. I was the primary caregiver for my grandmother. She had diabetes and developed a urinary tract infection after a hyperglycemia episode and was incontinent. I came home after classes on a Monday and took her to the emergency room. They discharged her without medication because the urine culture hadn't come back, but she stabilized. I got home around 5 a.m., helped her with breakfast, showered, and went to classes on Tuesday. After classes, I returned home, showered again, and came back downstairs just as she vomited dinner. We went back to the emergency room and she was admitted. I went to classes on Wednesday and aced an exam. After class, I visited her, came home, and my mom cooked dinner. I sat on the sofa after being awake for 71 hours and started hallucinating, having a conversation with 2 friends who were not there. My mom called for dinner, saying, "Hey, I didn't know friends' names. We're coming for dinner." My mom, a psychologist, asked, "When did you sleep last?" As I turned around and saw my friends were suddenly gone, I replied, "Sunday." I ate and passed out in my bed around 8 p.m. I didn't wake up until 5 or 6 the following evening. Apparently, I have a huge bladder because I woke up feeling a bit hungover, and I'm pretty sure the toilet started to flush before I finished using it. I don't think I've gone more than 20 hours without sleep since. The hallucinatory experience was absolutely terrifying in retrospect. Story 92. I spent 2 full days mostly lying down, only getting up to use the restroom. I felt really lonely and missed my mom. I often dreamed about her and other people, so I slept a lot to see them. Story 93. I attended a church lock-in and had been awake since 5 a.m. the previous day. I was awake from 5 a.m. on Saturday until 12 p.m. on Monday, resulting in about 22 hours of sleep. Story 94. I think it was around 16 hours. I was 17, almost 18, and had been in a car accident. I was on a lot of pain medication and completely exhausted from the whole ordeal. My grandfather was checking in on me frequently, but I was too tired to get out of bed. Even though my car was totaled, my dashcam proved that I did nothing wrong and that the other driver was entirely at fault for the accident. It had been my grandmother's car before she stopped driving, and she had owned it my entire life. It was devastating to see it damaged and destroyed so quickly. Story 95. I drove from Arizona to Northern California in one night after working all day. I consumed a lot of energy drinks during the drive. By the time I reached my destination, I was so tired that I slept from 7 a.m. until 10 p.m. Story 96. After I spent a day building sandbags against a flood in the Fraser Valley, I slept for 18 hours. When I woke up, I discovered that the place I was trying to save had been evacuated and destroyed. Story 97. I experienced a major depressive episode lasting 16 hours and was also dealing with heavy bleeding due to my menstrual cycle before receiving my intrauterine device. Story 98. I actually slept for 13 hours because I was awake all night the day before at university. I had someone over, and she was snoring so loud I couldn't sleep. Story 99. About 18 hours in, I was tired and had slept a maximum of 3 hours per day for the last 3 days. I may have also experienced a caffeine overdose. I usually don't consume caffeine, but on that day, I tried energy drinks and think I drank them too quickly. I became sleepy very fast and literally passed out on my bed. It was the best sleep of my life, not going to lie. Story 100. 23 hours after flying from Alaska to Massachusetts with 3 layovers and a 2-year-old. My husband took care of our child while I slept. Story 101. Friday night to Monday morning. Have you ever heard of methaqualone? I took 4 after drinking a couple of bottles of cheap wine, and the next thing I knew it was Monday morning. Things happened that weekend, and I'm not sure yet what occurred. It was enjoyable the first time, but I really don't want to do it again. I'm pretty sure I should have died that weekend. Story 102. I used to be a very serious alcoholic, so I would often sleep for up to 15 hours at a time when I wasn't working. Now that I'm sober, I get a solid 8 hours of sleep every night with no fatigue or major depression. It makes a world of difference. Story 103. I was staying on my uncle's farm for about 14 hours. It was very quiet there, and the windows in his new house hadn't been cut out yet, making it quite dark. I woke up at 2 p.m. after getting home at midnight. Story 104. The longest I think was probably about 12 hours straight. I am not a good sleeper, so it is uncommon for me to sleep that long. Story 105. 15 hours hung over from SafeGrad. I got home around 3 a.m. and woke up around 6 p.m. when my friend's mom showed up at our house, worried because she hadn't heard from her daughter. It was an epic night. Story 106. I'm not a big sleeper. I never have been. The longest I would say is 10 to 11 hours, but I still woke up for a little while in between. Story 107. During COVID, I took some prescription medication, but I was too depressed, which made my sleep much longer than it should be. Story 108. 4 days of sleep. A teenager attempted to take my own life with over-the-counter sleep medication. To this day, I do not know how I survived. Sadly, my parents worked early and late, so no one noticed. Story 109. I don't know about the longest sleep. Maybe it was after I had swine flu. The best sleep I remember was when I left Afghanistan and landed in Romania. My heart says I slept in a comfortable queen-size bed, but my memory recalls the same uncomfortable bunk beds that the rest of the military has. But that experience was amazing. I think we all slept like royalty those first 2 nights. Story 110. I stayed up for about 30 hours straight during finals week in my senior year of college. I slept for 20 hours straight afterward, without any bathroom breaks. and felt like I teleported 20 hours into the future. Story 111. I was awake and asleep for 22 hours. I had the flu. I would wake up, roll over, and fall asleep again. I would wake up, use the restroom, and sleep some more. But it was unbroken. I couldn't explain it. As a father working the third shift for 7 hours, my philosophy was, strive for 5, for to stay alive. But if I get 6, that's the perfect fix. Story 112. Back when I was 15 or 16 and smoking cannabis was popular, my brother and I got completely euphoric. The sun set around 4 in the afternoon. I went to bed and woke up at 10 p.m. the next day. I had missed 2 whole family dinners. My brother told my mom I had come down with something. Story 113. 18 hours with the flu and a temperature of 40.6 degrees Celsius. I went straight back to bed after using the bathroom and drinking some water. I lasted a week like this before slowly improving and lost 6 kilograms. Story 114. I worked a 32-hour stretch at work with only a couple of catnaps. When I got home, I completed about 150 exams, covered approximately 25 kilometers, had almost every bodily fluid spilled on me in some way, and performed CPR twice. That's all I have to say. Story 115. Pretty much 24 hours with just a few brief moments of waking during that time. I had just returned home from my graduation trip. Story 116. If my calculations are correct, it was just over 34 hours. I attempted to take my own life, but it didn't work, and I woke up exhausted and feeling incredibly ill. Due to my dad's schedule, he believed we were both awake at opposite times. His excitement and teasing when I finally woke up and we started talking was enough for me to never try again. I was probably awake for about 18 hours one time when I was extremely unwell. Story 117. 15.5 hours in my bunk on a Navy ship in port. I fell asleep at midnight with a nice buzz going and woke up at 5:30 p.m. Story 118. I was feeling unwell and fell asleep around 8 p.m. on a Friday. I woke up briefly to use the bathroom and then returned to bed. Finally, I woke up fully, and it was early Sunday evening. Story 119. I had just flown halfway around the world while possibly sick with a cold. The journey took 33 hours from the first takeoff to the last touchdown, or about 40 hours door to door, including a 10-hour time change. I can't sleep on planes, and the night before departing, I started to feel a sore throat coming on. The next morning, I was showing many symptoms of the common cold. The journey was quite miserable for me. When I arrived at my grandpa's home, I immediately went to bed at 9 a.m. My family woke me up at 7 p.m. after a lot of effort throughout the day. They didn't stop until I opened my eyes, as I was in very deep sleep. They asked me to come outside, and I said I would be right out, but then I fell asleep again after being up for a couple of minutes. I woke up the next morning at 8 a.m. Story 120. For almost a year, I was rarely awake. I had seriously low vitamin D that wasn't found until I switched doctors. Story 121. We spent 30 hours as amateurs making edibles. The recipe was intended for 25 people, but we divided it 6 ways. Out of the 6 of us, 4 individuals got sick and missed the experience. I, however, slept for 30 hours in a tent at Devil's Lake Campground. It wouldn't have been nearly as difficult if I had been at home. After returning, I calculated the amount used. Each brownie contained 5.6 grams of flour, which was mid-grade and likely from 20 years ago. Story 122. I was temporarily assigned in Las Vegas for a special operations exercise in the Air Force. We were working 18-hour days for 13 consecutive days. I was a single person in my 20s in Vegas, so sleep was the least of my priorities. I made the most of my free 4 to 6 hours each day. When I got home, my girlfriend at the time asked if I was sick because I looked terrible and had lost 20 pounds. I got in bed and slept for a little over 24 hours. Story 123. If I had nothing to do, I would sleep every day for over 12 hours. Every weekend, I sleep between 12 and 14 hours. Story 124. In university, about once every 20 hours, it was right at the end of exam season, and I had been up all night finishing my last exam. I realized I could consciously unfocus my eyes to conserve energy for getting home since I knew the route and only needed to focus when crossing the street. I was incredibly exhausted. I mostly remember being so disoriented when I woke up at 7 a.m. instead of 7 p.m. It was winter, so it was dark during both times, making it hard to tell. For a while, I was regularly sleeping for 15 hours. I felt really depressed and preferred not being awake. Frustratingly, oversleeping doesn't provide energy. It makes you feel more tired. Story 125. I'm tired every day, so roughly once a month, I'll sleep for about 14 hours. The longest I've slept during those episodes was 24 hours. I never know what triggers it or when it will happen. Story 126. I stayed up for 50 hours once while I was deployed to the Middle East. I acted so erratically that my commander put me on 72 hours of quarters, and I slept for 35 straight hours. I was a different kind of messed up once I woke up. It took almost 2 weeks to feel and get back to normal. It was not fun. Story 127. I had pneumonia and mononucleosis at the same time. In a 3-day span, I slept nearly 60 hours. My parents thought I needed to go to the hospital. We went to a doctor, and he asked me if I wanted to be under observation. I asked if it would help me recover faster. When he said no, I went back home and slept again. Story 128. Once, I stayed up for 24 hours gaming. I woke up over 48 hours later, and it freaked me out. I never stayed up that late again. The mental confusion was too much. Story 129. I slept for 23 hours a day for 10 consecutive days. I am immunocompromised and had contracted a fungal infection and a viral infection that nearly took my life. I was unwell for a few days at home before being admitted to the intensive care unit for 10 days, and I continued to feel sick for 4 weeks afterward. It seemed the only way my body knew to heal was to put me to sleep. I even slept through many of the blood draws and tests. I was awake long enough to vomit rice, undergo computed tomography scans, magnetic resonance imaging, lumbar punctures, and take the medications I couldn't take intravenously. Story 130. Once, I had a school week, from Sunday to Friday, that resulted in a total of 16 hours of sleep. So when I went to bed around 5 p.m. on Friday, I woke up at 4 p.m. on Saturday. Story 131. I had a super high fever for 24 hours as a kid. I remember trying to get up for school, then going back to sleep, and waking up for school the next day. Story 132. But honestly, that isn't anything unusual for me. I can easily sleep over 12 hours a day if I allow myself. I slept 14 hours last night, actually, from midnight to 2 p.m. Now, at 9:30 p.m., I'm already feeling sleepy again. Story 133. 36 glorious hours after a week-long camping trip. I remember waking up once to use the restroom and then falling immediately back asleep, so I'll count it. Oh, to be 17 again. Story 134. I normally sleep only 6 hours at a time. Naturally, I am what is called a short sleeper. However, I am immunocompromised, and when I get sick, I tend to be ill for a long time, think a solid month for a simple cold. During that time, I often sleep for 15 hours straight. It is quite annoying. Story 135. A few years ago, my company became very busy and offered essentially unlimited overtime that paid double time. I worked my normal 8-hour shift and then 4 hours of overtime during the week, 6 hours of overtime on Saturdays, and 6 hours on Sundays, the maximum allowed on weekends, for 28 days straight. The final day of that overtime period ended on a Friday, and I got home at about 7 p.m. I slept straight through the weekend until Monday morning, only getting up to use the bathroom. Story 136. I had a particularly bad case of glandular fever, also known as mononucleosis for our American friends. I woke up about once every 2 days to eat something, take a shower, and then went back to bed. Story 137. Traveling from Saudi Arabia to Thailand involved planes, trains, and automobiles to reach Langkawi. My wife, our 10-month-old baby, and I slept for 36 hours upon arrival. Night and day became irrelevant. We were just bone tired. Couldn't believe it. We missed a day and a half of vacation, but we were ready and eager to enjoy the rest of the trip. Story 138. I think 13 hours is the longest I remember. One day in high school, I went to bed at 3 a.m. and woke up at 4 p.m. I wasn't happy about losing so much of the day. Story 139. During my teenage years during summer break, I wanted to see how long I could stay awake. I managed to stay awake for 11 days without any sleep. Then I slept for the next 80 hours straight. Story 140. I finished ranger school, got something to eat, and went back to my room. I bandaged my feet and fell asleep for 17 hours. When I woke up, I was very sore. Story 141. I once went to bed at a normal time, and after a good night's sleep, I woke up 22 hours later. I think that's the longest continuous sleep I've had. Story 142. 18 hours. I finished a super fun run of musical theater with 8 shows a week while doing an in-state tour. Very little drinking or partying was allowed while traveling. In the final week, the producers loosened up. We would get up, do the shows, find a pub, and party with locals for 10 days. I didn't feel tired when I put my head on the pillow. Neither did she, who I woke up next to 9 hours into the 18-hour nap. We kept our feelings secret the entire time, having seen so much drama and inappropriate behavior between other members of the cast. 9 hours into that nap, we thought we might get up and have some soup. Nope. We laughed and fell back asleep for another 9 hours. Solid. That was our last tour. We both grew a bit tired of the travel. So off to Los Angeles I went. She followed. That was a few decades ago. It shouldn't have worked, but it did. She's catching sleep next to me right now. And it all started with a tandem exhaustion nap that I will never forget. Story 143. 3 days. I went through withdrawal from one of my medications for some reason. I think I ran out and it was on back order or something. I didn't know about emergency supplies while waiting for it to be refilled. Story 144. I slept for 22 hours, getting up once or twice to use the bathroom. It was a deep state of depression. My roommate checked on me to ensure that I was still breathing. Story 145. The entire summer of 2024 marked a significant shift for me. In 2023, I divorced my ex after 37 years of abuse. In June 2024, I retired from a toxic job and moved 30 miles away from my home, which was also within 10 miles of the area where I grew up. All I wanted was to rest and be left alone. I was exhausted. In September, I accepted a part-time registered nurse position in home care. I also joined several women's groups on social media and made many new friends. I needed those 3 months to sleep, reflect, and regroup. My life had been challenging for a couple of decades, but I was finally able to turn it around. Story 146. Well, if we count nearly being dead and on life support and unconscious as sleep, it was a bit over 3 days. Otherwise, the longest I can remember sleeping was during the Vietnam War when we had a continuing conflict that lasted 3 days, during which I was awake from beginning to end. I slept for 12 hours, woke up long enough to have a bite to eat and use the restroom, then went back to sleep for another 6 hours. Understand, I could probably count on one hand the number of times in my 75 years that I slept as much as 8 hours at a time. I rarely sleep that long even when I am very ill. 6 whole hours is a long time for me. Story 147. I was staying at my grandparents' house for 16 hours because I was sick. I woke up, asked for breakfast, and received a laugh and some lunch. Story 148. 4 days later, I ended up in the hospital with pneumonia. I do not recommend it. Do not be stubborn, go to the emergency room. Story 149. In my early 20s, after a night of excessive drug use, I experienced a drop that lasted a full 24 hours. I was shocked that I slept an entire day away. What's surprising is that even an eighth of what I consumed back then would probably be fatal for me now. Story 150. About 14, my boyfriend's roommate gave me Xanax to cope with finals. I woke up and have been terrified of pharmaceuticals since. Story 151. I went out on Friday night and got home on Saturday morning around 9 a.m. I went to bed and got up in time to leave for work at 9 p.m. on Sunday. I was still tired. Story 152. 22 hours straight. Depression can be overwhelming. I finish my work week on night shift, crawl into bed at 7:30 a.m. Sunday, and wake up at 5:30 a.m. Monday. To be honest, I nearly do this every week. I end up resting all day Monday and Tuesday before going back to work on Wednesday. It's a cycle I wish were different. Story 153. About 18 hours after drinking too much the night before. Now I think I've slept over 8 hours maybe twice in the past year. Story 154. Not one part, but in two. 5 a.m. to 1 p.m. and 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. After a one-week holiday in the UK, I slept 20 hours out of a 26-hour time window. Story 155. I'm not sure, maybe 15 or 16 hours. I went to sleep at around 7 a.m., and when I woke up, it was already around 11 p.m. Story 156. I got the flu really badly when I was about 9 or 10 years old. Out of 3 weeks, I remember the first day and the last 2 days of having it. I also have vague recollections of crawling to the bathroom because I had the worst headache I have ever experienced, along with severe nausea and vomiting. I did a lot of drugs in my late teens and early 20s. I stayed up for about 20 days with only a few short naps in between. By then, I was hallucinating almost nonstop. I finally slept for about 70 hours straight, without using the bathroom or eating, just the deep sleep of the dead. That might be why I appreciate naps and a good night's rest nowadays. Lastly, I was on an antidepressant in my early 30s that made me sleep about 18 hours a day. I took a low dose, but it turns out high doses have the opposite effect and can make you feel wired. Seroquel can be very harsh. Story 157. In 2005, I lived on a kibbutz. I didn't feel well with a very sore throat. I went to the nurse, who, despite a language barrier, said, "Rest, take," and handed me cough drops. Over the next few days, I felt worse and worse, and went to bed right when I got home from work at 11:30 in the morning. I stirred and looked at my clock, which read 1 in the morning. I forgot that Israel uses a 24-hour clock and rolled over to sleep, thinking it was only 1.5 hours later when, in reality, it was 1 in the morning the following day, not 1300. I rolled over and went back to sleep, only to wake again to see my clock reading 4:30. Still thinking PM. Keep in mind that I was very ill during all this, so my sleep was restless and uncomfortable. I finally woke to knocking at my apartment door. My kibbutz sponsor entered, looking very concerned. They hadn't seen me in 2 days. 2 days, I exclaimed, glancing at the clock, which read 9 in the morning. But it's nighttime. I have only been asleep for about 10 hours. Nope. She opened the curtain, and it was light outside. It had been 21.5 hours. She took me to the hospital, where the doctor informed me that I had nearly died from strep throat and that I was extremely lucky. I had been sick for nearly 2 weeks at that point. That nurse can still be disregarded, even 20 years later. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.